Hey folks, hope you're all doing well and welcome back to the channel. So it's that time again, a monthly show with my two partners in crime, Martin and Pete. And been looking forward to doing this topic, talking about guitar tones. It's something we've been talking sort of off and on as, you know, throughout the different episodes, but we wanted to kind of hone in and do a show dedicated to guitar tones, you know, basic explanation of what we think they are, and then get into some examples and some music. And before we get started, I am I'm slowly approaching 5,000 subscribers. So if you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe. There's like 70% of you folks that watch that don't subscribe, so please hit the subscribe. That would be awesome. And don't forget to hit the like as well. All right, so to help me in the guitar tone discussion, we have Mr. Martin Popoff and Mr. Pete Pardo. How are you gentlemen doing?
Yeah, doing okay. This could be a contentious one. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, Martin had some reservations about this topic, but
we had to twist his arm a little bit to get him.
Yeah. I'm slightly a passenger on this one. We'll see.
Let me just say hello to a few people that just joined us, and then we'll get going here. We got Gary H. Welcome. There's Johnny Crossy, Gordy. There's Mitch. Nice to see you. Donnie Boy 89. That's a mouthful. Welcome. Jason Budney, nice to see you. There's Gary Joyce. Always a pleasure to see Gary. Gary H. Wayne McConnell, nice to see you, gentlemen. Gamers Guide. Captain Beyond, welcome. Yeah, so we're going to have just a fun discussion on guitar tone. So I don't know how you guys approach this. So I mean, we'll talk about tone in general, but then we'll get into the specifics. But what I did as far as the specifics is I just kind of looked at three bands and kind of how their tones maybe changed over time, and then pick a specific era where I prefer their tone in through their catalog. So how did you guys approach that? Did you do sort of the same thing, or
Pete?
Well, how much time we got? It's funny because of course I signed on with this immediately because I think for me guitar tone is very, very important.
Yes,
when I'm listening to music. But you know, it's like the as we got closer to today, I didn't even tell you guys which bands I picked because
you didn't.
I changed them like 10 times, and I just changed one of them like literally 10 minutes ago because I keep changing. Anyway. Martin and I have been doing the show on SOT for the last like month about producers.
Yeah.
And I started thinking a lot this week about how sometimes certain producers can help these guitar players with that tone that we love so much.
Yeah.
So, and I've struggled with like, what do I want to pick? Because I love guitar tones in general, but there's good tone and bad tone. I like a lot of like really aggressive metal bands that have that big wall of sound, heavily distorted guitar sound that I love. And if it's really crisp and clear and crunchy, that's great tone for me. On the same token, there's lots of like jazz or fusion or blues players that play very cleanly and they have that silky smooth tone. And I love that too. So like trying to pick like three bands that out of like the million that I like, it was really, really tough. But ultimately, to kind of in a roundabout way to answer your question, what I did was I picked, this is no surprise, Hack, you're going to appreciate this. I picked three bands whose guitar players are mainly Les Paul players. I love Strats. I love all these other guitars, but there's something about the tone of a Les Paul that just melts me into butter every single time. Yeah. So I went with three bands where primarily that's what they use. and we'll get into it when we talk about the bands, but that's kind of how I approached it, and how some albums sound better than others. Some are tied to producers, some are tied to the players, and some it's a Les Paul through a Marshall with just the right amount of gain. I'm a happy camper. So I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
Yeah. No, that's cool. Well, Martin, what about yourself?
Well, I had to go to 3 bands that I had any opinion on whatsoever about their tone, kind of thing. And it did vary over the catalog. And it's just literally bands where I've paid any attention whatsoever. And I really like the tone because there are so many bands where I've never even really thought about guitar tone very much. And especially I've never liked or thought about, I don't think I've ever spent 10 seconds thinking about guitar tone when it comes to guitar soloing. Because to me, that is always kind of high and screechy and irritating in any hard rock context, right? Any hard rock or punk or even prog context. Granted, there's very clean playing when it comes to that as well. And then, then there's acoustic guitars. But I almost thought I'd pick somebody where I definitely usually don't like their tone, but I didn't pick one of those. But I'll bring that up as we go along as well. So.
And see, one of my guys here specifically I picked because of his tone on his solos, even though the rhythms are right. So I know which ones you pick, so one of them jumps out immediately. But so anyway, sorry.
So, I mean. So the first part of this is what is tone. You can really get into the weeds here. I mean, because there's channels based, millions of YouTube channels, including mine, to some degree, that are all obsessed with guitar gear and different sounds and different amps and all that sort of thing. But I mean, tone or the sound of the guitar. I mean, it's 3 things, right? It's obviously the player, it's the guitar, and it's whatever he's using for amplification. Those are sort of the 3 main ingredients, right? And probably, and I'm just going to use very broad strokes here because, not everybody in here is going to be a guitar player. We can't assume that, but in very broad strokes, the 2 probably, you mentioned the Les Paul, the 2 sort of most used guitars in a lot of recordings are the Les Paul on the one side and maybe a Stratocaster on the other side. And the difference in the sounds between the 2, the Les Paul, it's got the humbucker, so it's got the, for lack of a better term, the more powerful pickup. It's picking up the sound. So that'll generally give you like a thicker, more heavy, more mid-range, more maybe creamier sound. Okay. Whereas the Stratocaster would be like a little more bell-like, a little more little thinner, maybe more articulate, a little more high-end, a little more trebly. And one of my examples is a band that, and a lot of bands do this, and I do this on my original music, is where you're playing a rhythm part. What you do is you slap on a Les Paul, and then you double track it with a Strat, and the Strat kind of fills in all the the missing harmonic content, so to speak, right? So that's kind of the 3 ingredients. And then you can get into a lot of processing and effects and all that sort of thing, and all of those things will obviously influence the sound of the guitar. But the thing is, with the sound that guitar players are looking for is usually dictated by the style of music that they play or the type of song that they play, right? So, if you, like, for example, I'm going to use like some really crazy example. Like, you're not going to use a Tony Iommi tone and play blues or Stevie Ray Vaughan. You're not going to do that. I mean, it's just going to sound terrible. By the same token, you're not going to play Mob Rules with a Stevie Ray Vaughan tone, right? So everything is, the tone is sort of like sculpted, if you will, to whatever the music is. And sometimes, and the bands that I picked are where the guitar tone stands on its own as a good sound. There are players that will sculpt a guitar tone for specific music that on its own sounds like crap, but just works within the context of that song. Jimmy Page was for me, the best at that. He just sculpted a different sound for every song, every part, and that's why Zeppelin is what it is, right?
I mean, it's almost like a whole other conversation, like when you talk about like great players who had lousy tone.
And there are,
like,
yeah,
right off the bat, Steve Howe from Yes. No one doubts his expertise, and he's an amazing player. He's one of the all-time greats. I'd argue that he's hardly ever had good tone on any album, save for maybe he sounds great on Drama, right?
yeah.
Like most of the other albums, you're marveling at his playing, but his tone, it's not always all that good. Look at Roy Buchanan, one of the great players of all time. It's a terrible tone.
Terrible.
An amazing player.
Yes, yeah. Actually, that was an idea for a future show. I think we're gonna, if you guys are wanting to do something like that, because I think would be a good follow up to this one.
And
but
one of my favorite players of all time, and spoiler alert, I didn't pick him today, is Richie Blackmore. I don't think he really had great tone throughout his career. Amazing player, one of my all time favorites, but is he a guy that I would pick for pure tone? I don't know, not really.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's lots of examples of that,
Yeah.
right? Where, and again, I'm thinking of doing this for a future show where like you've got albums that you absolutely love the songs and everything else, despite the guitar tone.
Yeah.
Like these songs are so good that even though the tone is garbage, we still love these songs, and there's tons of examples of that, right? You know. So so that's basically what we're talking about here. So I guess we can go around unless you guys have something to add before we get going here.
No, I think it'll all come out in the wash.
It'll all come out in the wash, yeah. So I figured. All right, so we'll do this order because Martin's beside, Pete below. So Martin, pick your band and talk.
Okay, just to open the discussion, and like I say, so yeah, I'm not really buying into the importance of all this in a big way. I mean, I do like talking about production, and to me, tone is like 11% of a production, and that's how important it is. So if you even, some people think even talking about production is nerdy, right? So to me, talking about tone is like 11% of something that's already nerdy kind of thing, right? It's to me, it's one sound in a big mix of sounds. There's bass guitar, there's bass drum, there's snare, there's how are the cymbals sounding, and there's where does the where do the vocals sit? Okay, so let's try this out. So Metallica, I took out a few Metallica to show here. Kill 'Em All, Reload. I took out this for a specific purpose because, so here's a heavy band. And I do remember hearing Kill 'Em All and thinking, I love the power of the guitars on here, how authoritative they sound, how this is just overall a really good production. As a kid, I was 20 at the time. I mean, I had no clue who Kirk Hammett, what he was playing versus what James was playing. As time goes on, they have I suppose they have amazing tones because I think the production in general of Ride the Lightning is amazing. I think Master of Puppets is radical. I don't particularly like the guitar tone, although we know Justice is all about the lack of bass, but and then you get to the Black Album, and I think it's kind of just there. But I think the best tone they ever got was on Reload and Load, which has my least favorite songwriting on them. But I think everything sounds great on here, including the drum sound. But I think there's a richness here that even as you move into, I think Saint Anger has super interesting guitar tone. But I think the last three albums that sit as a trio for me, you're back to kind of a Black Album. It's perfect. It's great. It's correct. It sounds very expensive and like a big stadium rock band, but there's nothing super important about it. Now, as time goes on, I learned the difference between what James is doing, and James is doing on some of the records, he's doing all the rhythm guitars, but then later on, Kirk comes back and he's part of the rhythm guitar thing. But we know Kirk is in there playing the solos, and a lot of people aren't crazy about his tone and aren't crazy about the use of wah-wah all the time and stuff. But I don't even know half of what this stuff I'm saying has much to do with the tone. I don't know what guitars they play because I swear to God, I just saw them live and I'd never seen so many guitar changes in my life. It was unbelievable. And they were all really like, they almost looked, every single one of them looked like a custom 70s shag band. It was just amazing design on all of them, right? They looked incredible, right? And you could tell there were definitely a lot of different makes and models and stuff. But you know, and this thing about what amplification, I have no idea. I mean, half the time they're just going straight into the board. They're sitting down in the control room, doing their guitars. You know, it could be anything, right? It could be being mic'd through the air. It could be mic'd through actual amps. They could be playing like they're playing live. I don't know any of that stuff, right? But so I would just say that that I think I could celebrate Metallica for what little I know about guitar tone. I think I've owned 2 guitars in my life, and the one I have, believe it or not, is a PV. I've got a PV guitar. Is like I've had that for decades, right? So I plink along. I don't know a lot about guitar, but I suppose what I'm saying is I feel like Metallica, there's such a richness throughout this entire catalog that you could talk about Metallica guitar tone for an entire episode. And there is so much difference there, but I do love it on Kill 'Em All. I do love it on Ride the Lightning's totally different. I do love it on Master of Puppets, totally different. I'm fine with it everywhere else. But I think the best they ever got, I love it on Saint Anger, but I think the best they ever got was Load and Reload. And that's a lot of different guitar tone that even I can hear someone who doesn't even know what the hell he's talking about. So
Martin, what year was Load?
Load would be 96, I believe, right?
Okay.
And Reload is 97, yeah.
All right. The reason I asked that, I'm pretty sure that that's what I remembered as well. I've heard throughout the years that one of the big influences on them for those 2 albums was Warren Haynes, his work with the Allman Brothers and specifically Government Mule. Now, I almost picked Warren for this episode because he's a Les Paul guy, and he's into that classic 70s blues rock, heavy blues rock tone, like Paul Kossoff and Leslie West and so on. And to me, those 2 albums sound, out of all the Metallica albums, sound so different because I think they're going for that kind of warm Les Paul through a Marshall, you know, forget no distortion boxes, no nothing like that. And I think they really, and again, I don't really care for the songs much either, but I always like the way those 2 albums sounded from that perspective. That's not really what I wanted Metallica to sound like, but I think that they totally hit on what they wanted to do there, as opposed to the early albums, which are all Flying V's and Explorers and all that sort of thing. Played through.
Fernandez. That Fernandez Strat. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Yeah. With the high gain, right. With the heavy distortions and all that kind of stuff. So
that's the thing with the high gain too. I mean, you know, I'm sure, Martin, when they were switching guitars, you probably didn't notice a difference in the sound, because when you're pushing, you've got that amount of gain, you could be playing a vacuum cleaner, right? It doesn't really matter, like, because there's no, the character of the guitar is lost because you've got just so much gain happening. You just
especially if you're using humbucking guitar with humbuckers, right?
Yeah, it's like it's lost, right? So if he's playing Greenie, or if he's playing one of his, you know, like his Jacksons or whatever, like you probably wouldn't even be able to distinguish a difference in the tone there. And it's funny you mentioned Metallica, because you can tell, like, early on, it was really hard, really difficult as a producer. Now we're going into this kind of vein here, to record guitars that heavy and make them sound heavy on record. And bands like Metallica, you can really hear the evolution of how much better they, you know, producers got and recording techniques got in recording that heavy guitars and making them sound better from record to record. You can really hear that, you know.
Yeah, I don't know if I mean, I really think Kill 'Em All is remarkably great sounding guitars for a baby band in 1983 recording in upstate New York. So there's an evolution, but they change a lot over the years, right? I mean, 5 records in a row, radically different every single time. And then if you include Load and Reload, it's different totally again, right? So but you know, the one thing about and Brian Slagle told me this, and it's kind of interesting, and a few other guys have said this as well, is that in thrash, because it is so much about the guitars, everything else almost has to accommodate that driving locomotive of riffdom that you get in thrash, right? So it's like, how do you even get that bass drum to sound to cut through it all? And
right.
one way they do it is they just turn it into that really clacky Vinnie Paul kind of bass drum, that smack. and so you can hear it, right? And snare, they fool around with the snare a lot as well. And bass is just an afterthought. I mean, even when you hear bass, even when you hear bass on an album in thrash, it's like a bass sound. You never hear the articulation, because the articulation is all taken care of by the the massive amount of rhythm guitars.
Well, plus they're putting gain on the bass too, right?
Yeah.
So just the whole idea is to make it sound like one giant guitar,
Yeah, well,
and that's what gives it that bigness,
But there's a lot of cases in Metallica, like say if you get up into those last 3 albums, where you get this almost sounds like bass pedals bass. It's so separated, so it isn't part of the guitars. It just sounds like that's the bass on a Metallica album these days. It's just this bass tone that goes through everything, but it's not particularly married to the mid range. It's actually way off in the bottom end.
Yeah,
it doesn't even sound like Rob playing bass generally. I mean, it's funny what they tend to do is, okay, it's almost like, Rob, we want to hear you play bass now, so now's your chance to really play bass, and then you get a whole different sound, and you go, oh, Rob's playing bass. It's almost like a reminder that he's playing bass. But most of the songs, it's just that's all it is, right?
Yeah,
a kind of thing going on in the background.
Yeah. All right, Pete, what's your first pick?
All right, my first band, and again, this is the one that I just changed to 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, whatever. I've always loved the guitar tone of Neil Schon, and so I chose Journey here. And there's kind of an evolution with him, and like some of the tones that I prefer. And initially, so again, if we go back even before Journey, when he was with Santana, so he played specifically Les Pauls. I think he might have played SGs, but he was mostly a Gibson guy back then, because Carlos was as well. And I don't know if his tone was anything remarkable on those Santana albums, because they gave Carlos had the sweet sound on those records, and then Sean would come in and he'd do these fast little things, and he really didn't hone in on some of the stuff we would hear with Journey. But starting like with these first few albums, the early ones, he's strictly playing Les Pauls early on. And I always love these guys who have it's a clean sound, but there's just enough gain on it and not much else. Occasionally they'll use wah-wah with everything, whatever, but like the songs don't necessarily need to be guitar dominated, but when he will come in with a solo, it's crystal clear in the mix. Every note is perfectly articulated. There's just enough fire to it, but there's just enough of that sweet sound that you really like. And that's why I've always thought he's like one of the greatest melodic lead guitar players of all time, because he creates these memorable solos that are just as memorable as like a vocal melody in the chorus. But you remember them, and you hear every note perfectly articulated. And even the fast ones are like that. The slow ones are like that. And throughout like the 70s, like I said, he was using Les Pauls throughout most of the stuff that, of course, I treasure the most here. And I think like right around the time where we're talking about like Escape and Frontiers, he's starting to use more Strat style guitars. But I think his tone still stayed really, really well. And nowadays, like he's using Paul Reed Smiths and various other things.
Yeah.
And you very rarely see him on Les Pauls or Strats anymore. But something about this guy, the way he attacks the strings, again, heck, they say 75% of it's what comes out of the fingers, right?
Yeah.
The tone is in the fingers, and then the rest of it is the strings and the amps and whatever else. And there's something about the way this guy attacks those strings and the use of vibrato and everything else that I think contributes to everything we love about Neil Schon so much. So the riffs have that bright metallic sheen that I love. I mean, that's like my favorite type of, guitar sound. But when it comes to the soloing, it's just crystal clear, perfectly articulated with just the right amount of oomph to give it that extra edge. But there's plenty of air where all the notes can breathe. And I absolutely think it's just one of the most gorgeous guitar tones I've ever heard before.
See now you're kind of starting to lose me here, because I don't know my Journey well, and I don't know my Santana at all. But when I think of classic Journey, all I can think of is screeching, distorted racket. Whether it's playing a riff or playing the solos, all I can think of is Mike Stone making a pile of noise and Neil Schon kind of going along with him and making a pile of noise. To me, classic Journey just sounds absolutely like here's my favorite tones. It's like way at the bottom. It's
Wow.
like it sounds like a mess to me. There's a lot of distortion, is there not? I mean, that's one thing, right? Don't you think there's a lot of kind of
No,
stone mix? No,
not really.
boy,
No.
okay, I gotta go listen again, because I
I
just
mean, maybe a song here or there, Martin, but not like throughout all these albums. I mean, there's lots of clean guitars on these albums.
You know, you mentioned the air. Like, I mean, the thing is with Neil Sean is you know, he's very fluid as a player, but you know, he his phrasing, and he leaves space, and then he's got the vibrato, his note choice, like all of that stuff, and the gain is just there, so the notes sing. You know, so
Yeah.
when he holds it, it sings for a
Like,
while.
think of the solo on Faithfully, right? Which is a slow ballad, right? But when that
Yeah.
solo comes in, I mean, to me, it has everything we just talked about.
Yeah, it's
There's not
perfect.
a ton of notes, right? There's little fast flurries, but mostly they're these
Yeah.
notes that are spaced out. The phrasing is just perfect, and it's so memorable. Everybody, whether you're a musician or not, most people can hum the solo to Faithfully, and it's just, I
Yeah.
mean, they know how it sounds in their head. They're hearing it up here. So,
For me, it's Stone and Love, man. That
oh, that
outro,
is absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
holy shit! I mean, the
Yeah.
guy's just a
Separate
absolute
Ways is great. I mean, we could
separate
go on and on.
ways. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, he actually had, and it was very short lived, and I forget the company that made it, but he actually had a signature model there briefly. I think in the mid to late '80s, but that kind of came and went really quick.
Didn't he have a signature Washburn or something at one point? I thought he
Might
had
have been a Washburn.
but
Yeah.
but we're going a little earlier. I think I'm talking like late '70s, early '80s.
Oh, okay. I don't. I know. I know. I actually held it and played it at one. It was. It's from what I. This is like so many years ago, but I remember it being like a Strat kind of looking thing, like with a little variation too. Anyway, but yeah. So my first pick. I mean, if you're talking guitar tone, you got to talk about.
Oh yes.
You know, ZZ Top, right?
And let me
you know,
tell you something. He knocked it out of the park right on their very first album.
Yeah. Well, there they are. They're pre big beard. But yeah, you know, I mean, the first record, the one that I had up there earlier, that's just a Les Paul, probably Pearly Gates, right?
Yep.
Going straight into the amp. I can't say. I've heard it's a Marshall. I've heard it's like a Fender Bassman. I don't know. But it's just, there is no accoutrement. There is no effects going on. There's nothing. That's just pure hands, guitar, and amplifier. And it just, you know, you can hear there's just a little bit overdrive there. So he's got a little bit of thickness there. But when he's singing those, playing those lead lines, you know, they're just, the articulation is there. All the dynamics, everything comes through in his playing, because it's not all sort of smothered in effects and things. And he had that tone pretty much for the first, he had that pretty much right up to Tres Hombres, more or less, that sort of sound, right? And then by the second side of Fandango, the studio side, then he started bringing a Strat into the mix, and he played a Strat there. There was a period there. He's got, and you know, because you can hear the guitar, the tonal difference immediately, right? He's got a Strat going on Fandango. You know, you can really hear it on Heard It on the X or Blue Jean Blues. And it's a little thinner sound, a little more trebly, maybe not as thick, not as gainy, but very articulate. And he carries through with the Strat on Tejas. Tejas for me always had a very Stonesy kind of, you know, sound to it. Again, less gainy, more clean. More Strat on DeGuello and El Loco, and then Eliminator. And that's when he went radical. That was like a complete departure in his sound. I mean, the music too. They started bringing the you know, the keyboards and the drum machines and that sort of thing. And then that's when he went to high gain. Because if you play those songs, there's a lot of gain. I mean, there's still, when I say not like Metallica gain, there's still mid-range. Metallica scoops the mid-range. The mid-range is all there for Billy. But yeah, it's a thicker sound. It's a more grindy sound, very, very crunchy, very grindy, and he carries, of course, that through for a bit, and then he comes back with in his more recent record, specifically Rhythmine, where he's got, it's sort of like that tone. It's still very heavy, a lot gainier than the early stuff, but it's almost like the two kind of meet, because there he is playing with a heavier gain, but again without all that electronic stuff going on, where it's just pure guitar, and you can still hear the whole articulation of his playing and everything, and it's a really, it's like a heavy blues sound, and it really works for for his more recent stuff. So he's gone through a few changes. As far as my favorite, though, I go right back to this. I mean, this is my favorite guitar tone. There's no frills on this. You can hear everything that he's doing, all the subtlety in his playing. His personality comes through, always has. Billy's been Billy from the beginning. He's never, he was the total package right from the beginning. And I mean, for me on this record, there's 2 killer tracks, Brown Sugar, Holy Shit, and then the absolutely best blues feel groove, Just Got Back from Babies. The playing on that, the dynamics that he puts into his playing, everything, and the guitar sounds so sweet and so nice, man, just awesome. Absolutely love Mr. Gibbons. There you go.
Yeah, and I think he's one of those guys that is instantly recognizable because of his tone and because the way he chooses his notes. Right? It's we talk all the time about these guys who play 3 notes and you know exactly who they are.
Yeah.
David Gilmour comes up all the time. As soon as he plays 2-3 notes, you know it's him. I mean, Billy Gibbons is another guy. You know it's him. I could say the same for Neil Schon. It's like they have that very identifiable style, sound, and tone.
And you know what they all have in common? Neil Schon, Billy, and I'll throw Angus into this, is they went through. I mean, they started in the 70s and they went through all the flashy 80s and but they never wavered. They didn't chase
like them, right? Yeah.
They didn't start doing all of this sort of thing. They kind of kept their character all the way through. And because it just works. It just works. Yeah.
And I think the other good thing about Billy is he plays that Chuck Berry style of soloing and playing lower notes and a lot of licks, right? He fills that space between soloing, licks, and his rhythm part. They blend into each other, right? It's and it's you talk to those guys and it's because we're a trio. We all have to kick in on carrying the tune sometimes, right? So he can't particularly go off and solo. So he doesn't play high screeching, annoying solos all the time, right? He's all over the fretboard and playing that. I guess that's what they call kind of a Chuck Berry style of soloing, right?
Well, he's mixing chords and single note lines and he's got riffs in between things that he does, and he's
a lot of licks.
Yeah, he's got that beautiful bed to play over because the groove that is laid down behind him is just, you can do no wrong when you got a groove like that. You're sitting on that.
Yeah.
So there you go.
All right. Well, that's a tone I totally understand as well. Yeah, definitely Billy Gibbons. So my next one is clean. I went with Brian May. I feel what I love about Brian May, I suppose, is, that whole, again, I don't know how often when he's not playing the Red Special or whatever, what his amplification is. And I think a lot of it comes from that Pence pick, having a metallic pick sort of situation. But he definitely gets a really kind of gnarly with a lot of hair on it. Riffing, the core part of the song, the riffing part, has just a lot of aggression and anger to it, but I suppose there's not a lot of effects on it either, right? And then when it comes to soloing and stuff, he's got a lot of different ideas where a lot of that interesting tone, an interesting tone comes through, because again, like I say, most of the time when a guitarist is just soloing up high, I can tell no difference in any of those tones, and they're all annoying to me. I really don't even enjoy it, right? But Brian May has that, all that multi-tracking thing goes on, and whatever, you guys can tell me what it's called, but whatever whatever, when you get those multiple harmonies of guitar, I don't know what that is, that like chorus or reverb, but it creates this inhuman, almost synthesizer sort of sound. So he gets that as well. And even when he does solo and plays high and screechy, there's a little bit of that parody of a guitar solo thing that I love out of Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. and Frank Zappa that you get out of Brian May. Sometimes, like, he loves making noises to just show that the guitar is a machine, right? And you can abuse it, right? So you get a little bit of that in his soloing as well. So he's got the absolutely formal, regal thing of the multi-tracked, Renaissance, medieval sounding, vaulted stuff that he does on for high guitar at that end, and then the other end, he can play as aggressive playing a solo as he can when he plays a riff. So, and as time goes on, I mean, I suppose he does lose the tone. At the same time, they lose the ability to write songs as you're coming through Hot Space into the Works and a little bit on the Game, but more like the Works and Different Kind of Magic, whatever it's called, and Miracle, like the whole ending thing. They're just not writing in the same vein as they did in the 70s. But yeah, I do love, and even when you look at this album, you listen to Fat Bottom Girls, it's such a totally different tone than on Let Me Entertain You or Dead on Time, right? There, you're just getting a big, crazy, heavy, distorted sort of sound. So yeah, that's in my very inarticulate way to talk about Brian May and guitar. That's what I love about Brian May and guitar.
Well, you got to make the argument. He's another guy, right? As soon as you hear one note, it's
yeah. Well,
you have to wonder. So that guitar that he made, right? Like,
yeah,
because I've always thought, I mean, God, there is nobody on the planet that ever sounds like him. It doesn't matter what producer they work with. Still, when he's playing, it just sounds so him. I mean, heck, I don't know. Down to those pickups using the coin, whatever. I mean, I think it's a combination of all.
It's a combination of that. He's always used Vox amps, right?
Okay.
With the treble booster. That's kind of his secret sauce. And yeah, man.
Yeah.
And then with the big sort of the more epic, like the Bohemian Rhapsodies and that. I mean, there's all kinds of layers of guitars. That's why the guitar sounds so big and it can sing and it's all that. And there's all these sort of layers going on, but. One solo that I gotta mention that is not using that guitar and not using any of those effects. Listen to the solo to Crazy Little Thing Called Love.
It's a telly.
And he's just playing a telly. And I mean, there he is. Like he doesn't. It just kind of show the guy's an amazing player and he plays great licks and whatever without all of the accoutrement. But. Yeah, like I mean, that on jazz, I love his guitar sound on jazz, like on the Fat Bottom Girls and what's the other song on there too? The other up-tempo rocker. Oh shit.
Well, the heaviest songs are "Let Me Entertain You" and "Dead on Time," which are not sounding like Fat.
No, there's another one on there.
Well, stuff can be very heavy
on
right?
too.
And that lines up a little bit. Bicycle Race can be a little heavy. What else is kind of heavy on here? It's basically it.
Yeah.
More of that jazz has a very cool tune. Just tone.
Yeah.
More of that jazz, right? And then it's got all these mellow things where he probably pulls out 5, 7, 8 different tricks than he does on the beat, right?
I like his guitar tone on Tie Your Mother Down. That's a pretty good one too.
Here's all his guitars, right? Hang on, I can't see what I'm doing here, but the gatefold, right?
Yeah.
His tone on Stone Cold Crazy is pretty kicking too.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like it's from his fingers there in a big way, right?
Yeah. And who else uses a sixpence or something? And he uses the razor.
Well, yeah, he uses. That's what I meant. That's where it really sounds
sharp
like
edge
pick, which is coin. Yeah,
and he uses specifically that razor edge part of it. And he says the reason why he uses that is it makes that really abrasive sort of sound so he can cut through. Right?
Yeah,
because like he's not doing any pinch harmonics. He's using that coin to get that kind of like that scraping thing right at the beginning of the
Okay.
note, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
unlike anybody else. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Neat.
All right. What do you got for a second, Pete?
All right, so for a second, I'm going to kind of continue on this kind of Les Paul thing. So the band is Whitesnake, and I specifically started around the time where they started working with Martin Birch, because I think the early stuff, even though you still have Bernie Marsden and Mickey Moody, and they're mostly playing Les Pauls, it's hard to articulate the tone because those productions on those albums are kind of muddy. They're fine, but they're a little on the muddy side. But I would say starting with stuff like Saints and Sinners and Come and Get It and Ready and Willing, all of a sudden now you're starting to get that classic Whitesnake, Gibson, Marshall blues rock sound. And early and right in this period, there's not loads of effects here. Bernie may use a wah-wah from time to time or whatever, and you got Mickey's using a slide quite a bit, but there's not lots of gain. It's not heavily distorted. It's fairly clean blues tones and very, very well articulated, and just good, solid blues rock, late 70s, early 80s guitar sounds, which I really, really like. But for me, the real sweet spot is when Slide It In comes around, and especially on the US version. So on the UK version, you've got Mel Galley from Trapeze and Mickey Moody. For the US version, Mickey's gone. John Sykes comes in. All of a sudden, it's got this much ballsier tone. And again, Martin Birch got a very different sound on this album compared to the ones before. As Martin and I talked about when we did the Martin Birch episode recently on SOT, they were going for American audiences here, for North America specifically. And so all of a sudden now they're upping the gain quite a bit. It's got tons of balls, still has that bluesy edge, but lots of balls. But for me, one of the greatest guitar tone albums of all time. And I know it's not for everybody because, like Martin mentioned before, maybe it's just a little too distorted, maybe too screechy on the lead work. But when John Sykes is all by himself on the 87 album, this to me is one of the greatest guitar sounding albums of all time from a tone perspective. I mean, it's absolutely molten guitar tone. And it's a Les Paul custom. I don't even know what amp he's using here. I have no clue. There's lots of distortion on it, but still you hear when he's playing a solo, even though there's a million notes going on, you hear every single note.
Yeah.
Even on the slower songs, it's very well articulated and just very sweet sounding. Whether he's playing with fire or whether he's doing slower, more emotional stuff, it's just in your face. And to me, it's like one of the biggest guitar tones on any album I've ever heard. And, they tried to replicate that after Sykes was gone on the next album. Vai is not really a tone guy for me. I love him as a player. I've never thought he had great tone, so it doesn't really work. But I think they did a pretty good job of recapturing that kind of Sykes magic on the more recent albums.
Yes.
With either Doug Aldridge or with
Red Beach,
and then the other guy came from Whitesnake.
Vandenberg.
No, Vandenberg's gone by this point in time. I'm drawing a complete blank on his name. Joel Hoekstra.
Hoekstra.
Yeah, and so I think these guys, like especially, I think Red Beach's tone is pretty good.
Yes,
even though he's kind of a whammy bar guy, technical player and whatnot. But I think specifically like Doug Aldridge has great tone. Again, Les Paul guy. Red Beach is more of like a an Ibanez or a Jackson type of guy.
Yeah.
And Hoekstra plays just about everything, but I think in Whitesnake he mostly plays Les Pauls because he's trying to go for that Sykes tone because they're playing all those songs. So I think they've done a good job of getting back to that sweet spot for me. But if there was no Sykes ever in Whitesnake, I still would be in love with the early Whitesnake albums because of the guitar tones, because it's just classic kind of Bad Company, free, just Les Paul through a Marshall, minimal effects to great effect. So that's my next. So my favorite obviously is the 87 album, but I could easily, like I said, pick any of these early ones. They all have great tone, but just different.
That 87 tone, guitar tone, that is an outlier for me because a lot of the stuff in that period, a lot of the tones I didn't like because there was just too much going on, too much noise, too much effects. That's the whole rack mount era, where everybody had a refrigerator full
works
of
on this one, right? It works here.
but that is the outlier because that's the one that sounds good. I mean, that record, the Rat records sound good, but then there's a lot of other stuff that just sounds like ass. It just really sounds bad.
Well, it comes down to the player, right? In a lot of cases.
Well, the player, the producer, I guess, and yeah. But I mean, Still of the Night. I mean, listen to that riff and just the whole breakdown and the solo and the power. It's all there, and it's beautiful. It's a work of art.
It's funny. I see a comment there from Barry Pearson. I agree with Pete on Vi. You think Vi would have figured out a warmer tone by now? And I don't like it either. It's just high and piercing and dog whistling. I even argued with him about it once, but obviously he's thought about it. He's like just one of the greatest guitar thinkers of all time, right? So he has specifically picked that, just like Steve Howe. He specifically, this is my sound. He wants that.
They're happy with it.
I don't like it either.
Yeah.
I don't like it at all either. And another guy I don't like is Jerry Garcia. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like these guys very, very specifically have thought of this stuff way, way more than almost anybody who's ever lived on the planet. And that's what Steve came up with. It's like, that's what I want to sound like. So yeah, it's just bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Well, everybody hears things differently, right? So, it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right. So the next band I chose, Bad Boys from Boston. Yeah, so they kind of went through a few things. And they started off, it's basically one of them will be playing a Strat, that Joe Perry, and then Brad Whitford would be playing the Les Paul, and then they would sort of, which is a nice marriage because, like I said before, one sort of fills in the gaps of the other and gives you this really nice, rich, a tapestry of guitar, so to speak. And, the first record, guitar's not so great. Get Your Wings, guitars are sounding pretty good. It's getting to that classic 70s crunch again that I absolutely love, similar to the Whitesnake sound that you were talking about, Pete. But for me, when they hit Toys, that is absolute guitar tone perfection for me. That entire record, it's just the right amount of crunch, but you can clearly hear both guitars. You can hear, if you listen closely, you can hear the Strat, you can hear the Les Paul. The mix, the blend between the two is beautiful. It's a nice, thick, beefy sound, but it still has that articulation, and it's warm sounding. Yeah, and they more or less kept that tone. Once they hit that, they kept that tone pretty much through the next few records. Rock in a Hard Place, that's maybe a little bit a little heavier sounding, maybe a little more blockier by that point. At that point they start to lose like sweet blend of tones. And then by Permanent Vacation, big reverb, big chorus. What don't we have on this record? Yeah, bring it in. Everything just got 85'd, and just horrible, just a mess. And it stayed like that for the longest, for that record and Pump. And then they sort of brought it back a little bit. The guitars, they got rid of some of that extraneous bullshit with Get a Grip. That's these guitars are starting to sound like guitars again. And then after that, who cares? Because they just kind of.
It's not about the guitars anymore at that
point. It's not
right?
about. It's just like if you can stand listening to the rest of those records, God help you. But yeah, my favorite, guitar tone, I mean, is the Toys in the Attic tone. Man, if I sometimes think about that. I mean, I grew up a Kiss fan. Kiss in the 70s always sounded like shit. Their guitars always sounded like shit, right? If they had those sounds, if they had the Aerosmith sounds, guitar sounds, how much better would those records be? I mean, again, we love the songs, but man, if those guitar tones were sounding a little better, I mean, Thin Lizzy guitar tones at times not so great either. Imagine if they had the Aerosmith sound, those guitar tones. Imagine if they had all these guys had Jack Douglas producing those guitar sounds. How much better those records would be. I mean, they're great records, but they could be even better, right? Because that is the best. I mean, outside of AC/DC, because I think AC/DC sounds phenomenal too. Highway to Hell sounds great. Like Back in Black, we're into the 80s, but next to AC/DC, I think the best classic rock 70s crunch sound that I like, my favorite, is that era of Aerosmith. Phenomenal.
To me, the pinnacle of Aerosmith tone wise would be combination Lick and a Promise and Sick as a Dog. That I just love the sounds on those. They're so powerful. You get the acoustic guitar and Sick as a Dog as well. But again, it's like they vary all throughout, and beyond which I think Rocks is their best produced album, and then beyond that, it's just never crossed my mind. It's just like Aerosmith's there. The guitars sound like everybody else's heavy metal guitars or hard rock guitars of the era. I mean, it's a little warmer, but I wonder how much of it is I'm thinking about the drums. I'm thinking about the overall production. I'm thinking about where Tom Hamilton sits in it. It's never stepped out. I've never gone, oh, Rock in a Hard Place, Night in a Ruts, Draw the Lines. Guitar tones are better than everybody else's guitar tones. It's never crossed my mind. It's just, and same with Deep Purple. It's like, yeah, I agree with you. I've never really thought about Ritchie Blackmore's guitar tone as anything great. And the only time I ever did was when I think, okay, what was the best sounding Mark II album? It would have been Machine Head. And lo and behold, at the same time, just like Rocks, I love the guitar tone kind of thing, right? So I'm almost like, it's almost like for me, it's married to the overall production if that guitar tone is going to be awesome.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a part of it, right? And there's certain producers that, Jack Douglas, that know how to record a guitar and make it sound good. Bob Rock, he made Motley Crue sound good. I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
All right, my last choice is these guys, Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi, right? So and this one in particular, I think they do radical things with guitar tone all the time. They invent crazy guitar tone on Black Sabbath. They make it even more pulverizing on Paranoid. Then they just go way off into the bushes for Master of Reality, which is hilarious. Just what they do with tone there is so radical and so heavy. It's nuts, right? And then Volume 4 sounds kind of like Paranoid. Bloody Sabbath, not much to think about. But when you get to this, this has, again, it almost feels like it's somewhat in the fingers. You think of Hole in the Sky, and you think of the way he's abusing that guitar and almost like bending the neck. It almost feels like it's a little bit Slash. It's a little bit Brian May. But for whatever reason, and like I say, I can't articulate it. I don't know. He's an SG guy, right? Always. I don't know. Has he every single? Did he ever experiment with 80s guitars much? I don't know.
I don't think so.
You guys know? So I don't know why it sounds that way, but just to prove that maybe it doesn't even matter to say he's an SG guy, because it just changes throughout anyways, right? Garbage in, garbage out. There's the amps, there's the producer, there's where it's going to get mixed, because we know it's totally different when it gets to this. And this sounds amazing. This is an incredible, fairly radical sounding guitar tone.
That's his best pure tone on that album right there.
I guess, yeah. And it's very mid-rangey. And then when you get to this, it's back to almost like a combination of Volume 4 and Master of Reality on this, right? And then you move on, and I just kind of forget about it. I don't even really think about the guitar tone ever again, kind of thing. It's just in there with these songs, and Tony's this heavy player. When it comes to playing his solos and stuff, I'm just annoyed because that just guitar played super high and add wah-wah on it just to make me even more annoyed. It's like I'm not enjoying anything about this tone when he's solos. If you say, what is his tone like? What tone do you like the tone? I'd say no. But for the entire rest of the presentation, amazing piles of different tones that you get out of Tony.
Well, don't forget too, he progressively down-tuned, right? So he was, E flat, and I think Hole in the Sky, and I'm sure somebody will correct me here, but I think he was tuning down to C sharp, right?
Yeah, I think everything from Master of Reality, most of those albums going forward in the 70s were at C sharp.
Yeah, and that gave it a lot more bottom, a lot more, heaviness,
Yeah.
So
But again, that's just another example of like, what does tone even mean, right? Does tone come from the producer, the amp, the guitar, the fingers, the pickups, the tuning down?
Definitely,
There it
yeah.
is in the mix, right? I mean, all you got to do is turn it up, and now you're paying attention to the tone. Whether you like it or not, it sounds more powerful because all you did was turn it up in the mix, right? So tone can just come from the definition of tone seems to me to come from a lot of different places, right?
Oh, absolutely. And then ultimately, it only really matters how you hear it, right?
That's true. Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. All right, last one, Pete. What do you got?
All right, well, Hack, I'm going to disagree with you because I think Thin Lizzy's tone is pretty damn special throughout most of their catalog. And again, why do I think that? Well, 2 Les Paul players. That's what it comes down to. I would argue, though, that Eric Bell, although a fine player, I never liked his tone at all on those first couple of Thin Lizzy albums. To me, it's just kind of muddy, stratty, noisy. It's good. The playing is great. I just don't think it sounds all that fantastic. But starting with Fightin', basically when this band realized, let's use these 2 great players who play these fine Les Pauls, who are very melodic players. Let's get them to do these harmonies and these cool octave things going on. All of a sudden, it sounds sweet to my ears. I would argue maybe at times some of the riffy stuff is maybe a little muddy and mid-rangey and not all that beautiful on the ears. But when these guys are doing those harmonies and playing their solos, to me, there's not much better. There's tons of great songs on here, whether you like the heavier stuff or the, slower stuff. So many great songs. I mean, this album, Johnny the Fox, probably has their best tone on any record with these 2
That's
guys.
the most Les Paul sounding.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And they don't.
Because I think John Alcock turns a lot of those Les Pauls into strats kind of thing, right?
Just very clean sounding. And this really, other than like when you get to Thunder and Lightning, there's not a lot of distortion, I think, on these Thin Lizzy records. It's more cleaner tones, using the gain on the amp, not using like pedals and things like that. But
there weren't any.
Yeah, but pretty much, right?
Just the MXR back then.
Yeah. But even like a song like Massacre, which is a pretty good song, it's not like totally like distortion heavy. These just, and even like here when it's just mostly Scott, Brian's kind of MIA, but he's on a couple tracks. It's still really, really sweet sounding. The stuff with Gary is great. I mean, Martin and I are going to talk about this tomorrow on our morning show, but Chris Sangarides worked with them on the Renegade album, and even though this isn't one of my favorite albums, it's a great sounding album, and I think Scott and Snowy sound amazing on this record. And then, of course, you bring Sykes into the mix, and then all of a sudden you kick up the balls quite a bit. And everything I love about Sykes and White Snake and then Tigers of Pantang and Blue Murder going forward is on here. All of a sudden, that big roar. And I like the big roar. I like that big, fat, distorted, Les Paul custom through a Marshall with gain on 15 and whatnot. So, I don't know. For me, I think again, it's with Sean and with Thin Lizzy, it's back to the solos and here with the harmonies. I think they just perfectly work with the 2 guys or whoever was in the band at the time to get them on the same page together, where what you're hearing, regardless of whether they're doing the harmony lines over each other or one guy comes in with a solo, then another guy comes in, maybe there's a riff, maybe there's this, there's that. To me, it's all very, very pleasing. And I've always thought Thin Lizzy had one of the great guitar tones, regardless of who was in the band, whether it's Gary Moore, Brian Robertson, Scott Gorham, Snowy White, John Sykes. Well, to me, it all sounds great. And I just love it.
No, Thin Lizzy. That was a bad example. But I'll stick with Kiss. And the other band, too, that would have benefited from a better tone, 70s band that I absolutely love, too, is Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Oh, yeah.
Because those guitars are they just sound like they're sludges, just buckets of mud. Heavy buckets of mud, but still buckets of mud. So,
You know what? Pretty good tone, and I just thought about it now, and I didn't even think about it. Bad Company. There's pretty good guitar
Yes.
on most of those.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He had a
it's
nice
pretty-
beefy sound that was like just beefy enough, not overdoing it. Right.
The
Even if-
first Rush album.
Oh,
Hmm.
his tone is molten on that, right?
Yeah. And
There's
that's again,
that word again. There's that word again. I love the molten tone. But oh yeah, Alex was just
all right. It's with 335 through a Marshall, right? Yeah. All right.
think about that. The 335. Here we are talking about this molten guitar tone, and it was a 335.
335, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So for my last pick, I'm gonna go with one of my absolute favorite players of all time.
There you go.
Stevie Ray, man. So my first two examples, the tone, varied from record to record. Stevie did 6 records, and he pretty much sounded the same all the way through. All he played was Strats, Strats through Fender amps. The only effect, he'd use a wah now and again, but it was pretty much a Strat through a Fender amp. I mean, he would play like 13 gauge strings.
Yeah.
He would have this heavy-handed, big percussive thing because again, it's a 3-piece, right? And he would just keep this big percussive thing going, and then he would play his licks, and then bang, 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 and everything he played was magic. And he's just one of those guys that just everything he played was magic and just sounded beautiful. And the absolute sweetest Strat tones you're ever going to hear are on Stevie Ray records.
And I saw him live twice.
Oh man,
it played exactly the same way on stage too. I will tell you.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, his tone is consistent from record to record all the way through. I'm just looking at
I would say the third album, it's not as great as the other ones, the tone, because I think that has a lot to do with the fact there's a lot of keyboards on that album. But those first 2 records,
yeah, well, the record that I picked, because I mean, it was more roughly the same tone, but the one that I think was recorded the best or just sounded the best to me, was Couldn't Stand the Weather.
Yep.
I mean, listen to Tin Pan Alley on that record. I mean, that has got some of the best. Whoops, what happened here? Get rid of that. That's got some of the best Strat tone you're ever going to hear. Not to mention, the dynamics in his playing and just his touch and his feel, and unbelievable. But I think a lot of it had to do again with just the real heavy strings, and he hit really, really hard, and just to kind of fill in the space, and of course is just his playing and his touch and the rest of it. So, it's funny, and I think, well, at least for myself and Pete, it's funny because the one thing that all of our guys had in common is it was just the guitar into the amp. No multi effects, no double tracking, no, you know what I mean? Like none of that. Just the guitar and the amp.
Like I was thinking before, because while we were talking, I was thinking about other bands that I could have picked for this, and I was thinking about Tom Schultz in Boston.
Yeah,
there's just so much that's added there, right?
With the Rockman, right?
It sounds amazing. I love it, but it's like I don't know if I would pick something like that for this.
Yeah. Well, the first record, I mean, come on. Like it's just, but yeah, he's got that Rockman, which is that little touch of chorus that's in everything he does, but still that nice articulation, that nice drive. And yeah, just that I like, so you say the word molten. For me, I like when an amp sounds like it's angry, like when those tubes are just like pumping, like you're just mad,
who else has amazing tone? Clutch. Right?
Yeah.
Those Clutch albums, man. Yeah. Insult. Yeah.
Clutch,
amazing. Yeah.
I mean, I picked 3. There's a million examples. I mean, we didn't want to mention. I forgot to say this at the top. We didn't want to do the obvious ones like Van Halen first record because that's like tone to die for. That's a tone that people will be chasing for the next 100 years.
Oh yeah.
Back in Black, the AC/DC, or AC/DC in general, like release those Highway to Hell Back in Black tones. That's another tone that they're going to be making, pedals to mimic that sound for the next 100 years. Those are the pretty obvious ones, but yeah, Clutch sounds really, really good. And for 80s tones, again, I'm not a fan of a lot of them, but Rat knew how to do it.
Yeah,
Rat,
I love Rat's sound. Yeah,
Rat's got a great
Yeah.
sound, Yeah.
I always thought George Lynch and Dokken had a really nice tone as well, especially on those early albums.
Yeah. So there you go.
nice.
All righty. So you guys you just mentioned the show tomorrow. You want to mention what you've got coming up? We'll start with Pete.
Yeah, so we have Friday morning at the Funhouse tomorrow morning. Martin and I have, what is this, our 5th episode? I'm losing track of how many we've done so far, but we're talking about some of our favorite producers and talking about our favorite album productions. So Chris Sangarides will be tomorrow. So tune in tomorrow morning for that, as we'll talk about some of our favorite albums that he produced. And there's some really good ones. And if you've missed out on any of the previous episodes, Martin Birch and it's late. I forgot who else we've done so far.
Roy Thomas Baker.
Roy Thomas Baker and a couple others.
Bob Ezrin.
Bob Ezrin. That's right.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's coming up tomorrow. And then we've got, all sorts of stuff happening all weekend. So tune in over at SOT.
Cool.
Right.
Martin?
Well, I've got my Guns N' Roses book coming in the next week or so. The big Iron Maiden book is out right now. So that's all martinpopoff.com. We got Contrarians, the video channel. I've been doing a series there, Who Invented Heavy Metal. Been doing some of these ranking the productions. Few shows just went up recently. And got the audio podcast, History in 5 Songs. With Martin Popoff.
Cool. So, folks, again, I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. I'm like 100 away. So if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. That would be much appreciated. Make sure you hit the like, and there's links below if you want to help support the channel. I want to thank these gentlemen again for coming and doing this with me. It's always a lot of fun. We will see you all next month for the next one. Take care, everybody. Cheers.
All right.
Bye, everybody.